Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. A few housekeeping things, as we do always at the beginning of our events here. If you parked in the Callaway House parking garage, do not forget to validate your parking. I know I am going to forget to tell you later in the program because I will be obviously distracted. So do remember this. There is a big sign at the back behind you that says validate parking. If that is not clear enough, that is where you will validate your parking. There is a QR code. It may direct you to make an account. That may or may not be frustrating for some of us. And you'll have to enter your license plate number and etc. So there's that. The other thing, if you need restrooms at any point in the program, they are located out this door by the piano, right over here to your left. And the final thing, before we get going, is if the pews prove to be hard and uncomfortable after an hour, we also have some cushions for those pews right over by the piano. Feel free to grab those at any time should you need. The idea for this concert, Songs of Resistance, came about many years ago, right after we had signed a contract to get a new pipe organ. I was getting, understandably, so excited about all of the different type of music that the new organ would be able to play and achieve successfully. And so I made a Google Doc, and I made a bunch of different programs, maybe 10 or 11 different concert programs. And I kept adding pieces to them as they fit the theme. But the one that I kept coming back to edit and to flesh out and to make more full was the Songs of Resistance. And so that's how we got to this moment today. My hope is that you might get to experience the pipe organ in a different way than many of us are accustomed to. Instead of an instrument for supporting group singing, I hope that you find that this is a powerful instrument that can be an orchestra all on its own. I hope you'll hear music today that is new to you. I hope that you will hear sounds and colors that you didn't know the organ could make. And I hope that you will find moments of peace throughout the program. So welcome and enjoy the music. Thank you very much. That was a setting of Lift Every Voice and Sing by Mark Miller. Lift Every Voice and Sing, if you are unaware, is known as the Black National Anthem designated by the NAACP. The song symbolizes both a powerful call for justice and a celebration of perseverance in the face of adversity. The lyrics inspire hope, they inspire resilience, and they inspire unity. The next piece is by Navajo composer Chee, who writes this of the next piece. Hózhó, for organ solo, presents a musical search for balance and beauty. At times, the music is unbalanced in form and meter, but seeks to return to a more harmonious state. The melodic content that opens the piece is presented again at the end, but in retrograde, which is a fancy way of saying it's played backwards. This symbolizes a balanced idea that surrounds the rest of the, oftentimes, unbalanced musical content. It returns the listener to the beginning of the piece with a melody that is in essence the same, but has been transformed by its experience. After that, you'll hear the first movement of Florence Price's organ sonata. In a field that was and still is dominated by white men, Price had to be leagues above her peers in order to receive the recognition that she deserved as a black woman, though her music is still relatively underperformed. You will hear her remarkable skill in this vibrant and expressive work and the way that she blends the classical traditions that were familiar at the time with the African-American music traditions that she grew up with. And then the third piece that I'll play is by Mary Beth Bennett. I was introduced to this piece last year at our organ dedication recital, so I apologize that not that much time has passed since you have heard it. But I found the piece to be so powerful with how still the music could be, with its brief contrasts of both weight and darkness. At the end of the piece, the composer quotes the hymn tune Victory, which we sing triumphantly every Easter with the words, "The strife is over, the battle is done, Alleluia." The trouble is, we live in a world that is ever at war, so the battle is not done. The composer takes this hymn tune and has it played on the softest stops on the organ, which are our flute celestes located in the swell box to your left. The tune is nearly inaudible, but it is there. And it reminds us that we can still sing of peace, even if it feels distant. We can still achieve peace when we use our voices together. So this is Hózhó by Chee, the first sonata by Florence Price, and Song of Peace in a Time of War. Thank y'all. The next piece is quite dramatic and at times strident. It is the Passacaglia from Shostakovich's first and only opera, Lady Macbeth. The music was originally scene change music that occurs after a character is murdered. A Passacaglia is a Baroque dance form built on a repeated bass line. So I will play a dramatic introduction, and then when the music gets very soft, that is when the Passacaglia theme begins in the pedals. So we have this bass line, and then it repeats and repeats and repeats, and over that, variations unfold. Layers are added over this bass line. Shostakovich uses this structure to create a dark and brooding atmosphere of obsessive intensity to journey along with the main character, Katerina. The repeated bass theme is haunting and relentless, which mirrors her emotions as she spirals into madness and guilt as she struggles with the course of her actions. The music reflects the main character's inner turmoil while she grapples with the heavy weight of her crime, and the variations evolve into a grim, almost mechanical repetition of fate. Speaking of repetition, I will then play a Philip Glass piece. This is Mad Rush. It's one of Philip Glass's most iconic works for the organ, along with his 4 dances. This piece focuses on repetitive, gradually shifting patterns and a steady, meditative pulse. There are 4 sections to the piece, each repeated, and each somewhat at odds with each other, and at times they are overlapping. Mad Rush combines a serene, almost hypnotic quality with a relentless drive, reflecting the emotional tension between stillness and movement. The repeated motifs are subtle in their variations, and they invite the listener to just get lost in the music. So I invite you to, at times, the music, close your eyes and just enjoy how the sound kind of swirls around you at this piece. It echoes Philip Glass's own fascination with perception and consciousness. As I'm playing that, it might outwardly seem that it's quite simple because it's a simple pattern repeated countless times, but it's quite difficult. It requires a very different kind of focus, and I think you'll find that even as a listener, it requires a different way of engaging with the music than perhaps some of the other music that you've been listening to this morning, afternoon. This piece will also feature prominently some of the oldest pipes in our organ, which are located against a wall over there. They are the Swell 8-foot Gedeckt. It is a wooden flute pipe. Unknown origins for our organ, but they are possibly older than the 1915 organ that we bought from the Paramount Theater. So some of the oldest pipes that we have in the instrument, which I feel is appropriate as this piece invites you into reflection. My fingers hurt. It's a lot of notes. Before I play the final piece on the program, I want to thank you all again for being here. It means so much to have your support. If any part of this concert today has piqued your curiosity about this amazing instrument that you see in front of you, then you're welcome to come up here. There's a bunch of stairs that you'd have to climb, but you're welcome up here. And you can take a look at the console, which is a work of art. You can kind of peek between the pipes and see all of our pipe work and all the buttons and knobs and all sorts of fun things that there are for an organist to do. If you're curious, you're more than welcome to come take a gander and see what it's all about. Additionally, I'd love to answer any questions that you might have about the music today or about the instrument in general. We're so lucky to have this instrument, y'all. It's amazing. This final piece I discovered and learned in the summer of 2020 in the wonderful season of lockdown. And I was looking for something to play right after John Lewis passed away in honor of his incredible legacy that he had here in this country, in the civil rights and, of course, in the House. And it's a setting of the civil rights anthem, We Shall Overcome, arranged by Carl Haywood. It uses a lot of trumpets, and we've got a lot on this instrument. It'll use the ones that you can't see tucked away in that swell box, and then it'll use these big horizontal guys that you see up there at the very end. It starts loud, in the middle it gets a little bit louder, and in the end it's just rock. It's kind of raucous, but it's lovely. I mean, it's a powerful piece for some powerful words. Thank you all again for being here. Here is Carl Haywood's We Shall Overcome.